Detours. Brought to you by Sports and Spokes, the magazine for wheelchair sports and recreation. In 1993, when friend and triathlete Jim McLaren was left a quadriplegic from an accident during a race, Bob Babbitt developed a concept to help adaptive athletes get back into the sporting world. Bob and a core group of motivated individuals in San Diego formed the Challenged Athletes Foundation with the vision of providing not only funding, but community support as well. Now, 30 years later, CAF has given grants in 70 countries and raised a staggering $191 million. Bob, wow. I mean, you guys have done some really amazing things. When you put those numbers, into reality.
Yep.
Could you ever have seen that when you guys got going?
No, I mean, really, Bobby, the whole idea was, really a lot of it came when Jimmy McLaren was a football player, first of all, offensive lineman at Yale, weighed 300 pounds, and was taking acting classes. This goes back to 1985, taking acting classes in New York City on his motorcycle, going to class one day and gets hit by a bus. And from that, he ends up losing his left leg below the knee and reinvents himself and becomes an endurance guy and runs a 3:16 marathon with a walking leg, right? So I was exposed to him when he came to the Ironman World Championship and went 10:42 with that walking leg, which was top 20% of everybody in the race. And we're talking, 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike ride, 26.2 mile run. At that point, he was the Babe Ruth of amputee athletes. He was traveling the world. Everybody knew who he was. I was covering him in Competitor magazine. Then 8 years later, he gets hit again. He's racing in Mission Viejo. A van goes through a closed intersection, hits the back of his bike, propels him headfirst into a pole. The guy's an amputee, becomes a quad. And at that point, from my years of Jim Knob and yourself, the one thing that what Jimmy told me is when you get injured, all of a sudden you're 30 years old and here come mom and dad back in your life. No sense of self, no sense of independence. So our goal was pretty simple. We're going to get Jimmy a van with hand controls, raise $25K through a little triathlon in La Jolla Cove, and move on with our lives. Get him that van, and so we ended up raising 49. We're like, our job is done. Get Jimmy the van, move on. But 3 amputee women who had put a team together to support Jimmy there came up to us and said, "It's great what you did for Jim, but did you know when you get injured, your health insurance covers a walking around leg or an everyday wheelchair. Nothing to do with sport is covered by insurance because they consider sport a luxury item." At that point, which we thought was the stupidest thing we'd ever heard, we got our 501(c) and decided if someone needed to be some equipment, training, or travel to stay in the game of life through sport, we'd be there. And now, like you said, $191 million later, and our endowment is over $30 million. The building we're in in Mira Mesa, is we got it for right around $1.8 million. It's probably worth north of $10 million now, totally paid off. And over $300K a year goes to grants from that building. And this year alone, in March, we sent out $6.6 million in grants, 4,500 grants to athletes, again, in over 50 in all 50 states and 73 countries.
Bob, a lot of people try to start nonprofits, 501(c)(3)s, and it doesn't work often. It's a difficult task. You go in both guns ablaze and everything is going great, but you got to keep that steam, and you guys did that. But what do you think? Was there some kind of an undefinable quality or characteristic amongst this group? I mean, you guys had a good group. Tabby King, Virginia Tinley, husband Scott, world-class triathlete.
Yep.
Rick Kozłowski, Jeff Esikow.
Yeah.
What was the magic formula behind this core group that made CAF so successful?
I think we all, we fit together like hand in glove. So Jeffrey was the CFO from the Tinley company. So he was the financial guy. I was sort of the marketing guy. Kaz put on all the triathlons in town. So that was, the 3 of us were really the core group of Kaz, you put on the event, Bob, you promote it and create buzz around it, and Jeffrey, make sure that the books are balanced. And that was really it. And then Virginia became our first employee, our executive director, and Jeffrey had worked with her at the Tinley company. And
yeah,
Tabby,
all great people. I've met these people, super motivated.
And Tabby, who's going to be receiving, ironically, our Jim McLaren Award at our Celebration of Abilities Gala next Friday night. She was intimately involved with adaptive sports. She was part of a company called RGP Prosthetics, so she knew what we didn't know. She gave us an insight into adaptive sport. But probably one of the biggest learnings for me was from Jim Knob when we did a feature on him. This is before McLaren was injured, for the cover of Competitor magazine. I don't know if you remember this, but
I do.
when I was sitting in Jim's living room, and I'm interviewing him, and there's a nickel on the floor. And I'm thinking, oh my God, the poor guy in a wheelchair can't bend down to pick up this nickel off the floor. And I go down to pick it up, and it's glued to the floor. And there's Knob drinking a beer, looking over at me. He's like, "So Babbitt, you didn't think the cripple could pick up a nickel off the floor? Here's rule number one: don't ever underestimate anybody." And it became sort of our guiding principle throughout the years at CAF. It's like, if an athlete says they want to do something, get them what they need and get the hell out of the way.
Right. No, hey, I couldn't agree more. I was in that very apartment, and so many of the legends passed through there. The Mustafa Badids, the Paul Wiggins, everybody, anybody who came to town passed through Jimmy's apartment. But speaking of, at that point, when you're getting to the part of CAF where you're crossing over into the big leagues, now you're starting to buy prosthetic legs that are uber expensive, and the bikes are no longer $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. We're starting to creep into that zone where they're $15,000 and more. There had to be a point where you started to recognize too that this was no longer a consolation prize to be involved in adaptive sports.
Yeah, I mean, adaptive sports, in the early days, we were in endurance. We were all associated with endurance. And next thing we find out, there's sled hockey and wheelchair basketball, and people are applying for grants for all these different sports. And if you think about it, and when we started reading the grant requests, so the bread earner is making $25K a year, and he's asking for a $4,500 wheelchair basketball chair. There's no realm of reality there that person could ever afford that. That's the thing that really hit me, is how little people dealing with disabilities are making, right? And so when you're talking about a $4,500 wheelchair, hand cycle, or a wheelchair basketball chair, it's changing the whole family's dynamic. Because dad's able to go play basketball, or mom's able to go for a bike ride and a hand cycle with everybody. The part of this that always hits me is just the whole family unit, the community that comes out of this. When you see, the community of wheelchair racers, the community of hand cyclists. Well, we have that in every sport that's out there. And the great thing was, through Tabby King, creating a relationship with Össur, which is the Icelandic company that makes the prosthetic legs, they became a partner. So those $15,000 legs that are custom to each athlete, those were provided by Össur for our athletes. So it wasn't like we were paying $15,000. That was our sponsorship agreement. And then starting clinics around the country, because it's one thing for somebody to come to our event and do a little running event with their prosthetic. But when we take those with Össur and CAF, and we do these amputee running clinics around the country, and then connect with the adaptive sport group in that market. So kid comes in, he's 3-4 years old, he runs for the first time on his prosthetic leg, and there's the adaptive sport group going, hey, you can play soccer, you can play basketball, you can play baseball. So it's hand in glove between us and the adaptive sports community in every market around the country.
No, and we caught up with old Rudy Garcia. He's Rudy Garcia Tolson, for all intents and purposes, is exactly what CAF stands for. As a kid, he just always wanted to be more, and he knew he could be more if he had the right equipment. You guys set him up. Look at that. He went from, 6-year-old kid just trying to swim at a meet with kids his age to a Paralympic medalist. I mean, that's unbelievable.
Well, more importantly than that, he at that time, they didn't think a double above knee amputee could run. Their whole thing was, so when Rudy's legs were amputated, and he had 15 operations before he was 5, 6 years old.
Crazy.
And then his mom would call Michael Davidson, who ran the prosthetic program at Loma Linda, and say, okay, Rudy's missing his legs amputated. When's he going to run? And Michael was like, lady, your kid's on stilts. He'll never run. He'll be in a walker. He'll be in a wheelchair. Maybe he'll use a walker, but he's above the knee. No above the knee amputees ever run. So Sandy would call him again the following week and the week after that. And so finally, Michael set up a meeting at Loma Linda with Rudy and his mom to try to tell her why her kid would never run. And Michael tells me, he says, I walk into the meeting in the lobby and Rudy's doing a handstand on the walker. And at that point, I figured if this kid wants to run, I better figure it out. So they became collaborators. What you see today with the high-tech prosthetic is because of the work that Rudy and Michael did, because Michael would bring Rudy in and he broke another socket. And he'd say, what happened this time? And he broke like 50 sets of legs. So Michael told me, he says, I sort of forgot that my collaborator was 8, 9 years old because he seemed much older to me because we were a team. And he said one time Rudy had broken a socket jumping off a wall or whatever he was doing. And so Michael says, I'm holding the socket. And I said, so Rudy, what happened? And Rudy says, well, I was jumping off at a sing and it cracked. And see, Michael says, I hold up the socket and all these Tootsie Rolls roll out. And it reminded me that my collaborator's 8 years old. And he's using his socket to stash his stash. But what Rudy knew from the very beginning was that he could impact other kids. I remember we did the Carlsbad Marathon used to have a kids run that they did up in Carlsbad at the shopping center. And first time we ran it, it was like 23 minutes, Rudy and I. He was probably 8 years old, 7, 8 years old. And his legs looked like Tinker Toys with all these different colors and everything. Eventually, he got to the point where he was running, 6-minute mile for that thing. And they changed perceptions about what somebody could do with prosthetic legs. And the thing that made me realize how special Rudy was is we did posters of Rudy. And at the expo after the run, Rudy would sign the posters. And this little boy was in line and his dad signaled me over. And he goes, my son, my son has a spina bifida, and he wasn't in a wheelchair, but now he is, and he's really having tough times dealing with the fact that he might be in a wheelchair the rest of his life. So I just went up to Rudy and said, Rudy, this young man coming up in a little bit, he's going through some real tough times. So you may want to, say something nice to him in your note. So the kid comes through with dad. Rudy signs a poster for him, and you could see the son look. I'll never forget. Son looks up at the dad and is like looking at what Rudy wrote. Rudy was like, I can't wait to see you at the Paralympics in 4 years. Just something like that. And he was 8 years old. It's not like it, but that's Rudy. When Robin Williams, who was part of our CAF family for 11 years, and Rudy would do the 1.2 mile swim at our event. Robin would do the 56-mile bike ride, and Scott Tinley would do the 13.1 mile run. It was Team Braveheart because Rudy would carry a little business card that said, "A Braveheart is a powerful weapon." Well, when Robin passed away, Fox Television asked if we would come in for an interview, Rudy and myself. And the first thought at CAF was, "Gosh, we really shouldn't do that because it's." Robin just passed away. We shouldn't be speaking out on this. And
I get it.
But you know what? We're always asking the media for support. And when they need us, we need to be there for them. So Rudy and I went in, and he was 16 or so at the time, something like that. And the commentator goes, "So Rudy, did you know what Robin was dealing with?" And Rudy was amazing. He goes, the great thing about what I'm dealing with is you see it. You see what I'm dealing with. You know about my prosthetic legs. We had no idea what Robin was dealing with, which makes it harder to react to. That was really true. You're dealing with depression. You're dealing with Parkinson's or something people can't see. It's a different gig. And I tell our athletes all the time, and parents of our athletes all the time, every time you leave the house, and nobody can relate to this more than you, if you're in a wheelchair or if you got a prosthetic leg or a prosthetic arm, the spotlight is on you.
Yes.
everybody's going to be staring. And you
Right.
either embrace it or you shrink from it. And fortunately,
Exactly.
most of our athletes have embraced it and understood that this is an opportunity to connect with somebody who might not know what we do.
Bob, as I was bouncing around looking at a lot of what CAF has done, and I read as much as I could, and I saw, it always dawned on me that CAF, what you guys were really about was you looked at the grants, you evaluated the person, you gave out the money, but it was so much more than that. You're talking about the mental strife and the psychological things that people deal with when they go through catastrophic situations. And there is so much behind the scenes that we don't see. And what I read was that not only does CAF, like I said at the top, not only do you give financial support, but there's a community within a community that supports each other.
Right. No question about it. And I think the perfect thing is when we do our triathlon that's coming up on October 26th, you've got people who are not amputees and people who are
Right.
not visually impaired and people who are not in wheelchairs spending time with people who are. And you realize that, that it's a person is a person. You're just another geek on a wheeled thing trying to ride up the coast. And so
Correct.
when we do our 640-mile $1 million challenge ride from San Francisco on down to San Diego, and you've got 28 challenge athletes as part of that ride out of 130, 140 riders, you're riding next to somebody in a hand cycle. You're riding next to somebody who's on the back of a tandem because they're visually impaired. You're riding next to somebody who's got a prosthetic leg, and you get a sense of who they are as a person as well as what their challenge is.
I read a stat that I thought was pretty significant, and this must, not that it's great to give grants to everybody to get moving, to get motivated, because I think you and I recognize that via sport, you can sometimes overcome difficult situations and move on because of that. Start going to school, maybe
Yep.
get a career, start a family. So it's not what CAF does is not just provide athletic equipment, you provide hope in many ways.
I couldn't agree more. And that's when you look at a lot of our YouTube videos, and one in particular, we have a young man named Ivan Shaban from Ukraine. And we're talking in March of 2022, he and his father in Ukraine, his stepdad in Ukraine, were looking for food. And a Russian tank pulled out of formation and ran them over from behind and killed the stepdad. And Ivan's leg was mangled below the knee. So through some diplomats, he was able to come to San Diego and work with Peter Harsh, one of the best prosthetists in the world. And Peter built him a walking leg. Well, then a family here in San Diego took him in and became his guardians. And then he sees the ocean for the first time
Wow.
and decides he wants to surf. So Peter builds him a surfing leg. Then he gets accepted at Torrey Pines High School as a senior, learns English basically overnight. The family that took him in, dad speaks 7 or 8 languages and said, we are just speaking English in the house. Seriously, he was here a month and I did an interview with him in English. So
Wow.
he ends up running on the track team. He's surfing. He ends up getting a scholarship to USD that he started at right now. So here's this kid from Ukraine with a puka shell necklace, a man bun, and a surfboard who is
Classic.
living and breathing the American dream. And then he
Yeah.
did his first triathlon a few weeks ago. So it's just like we can change people's lives in a lot of different ways. And that's what I love seeing. I love seeing when people become a better version of themselves.
Yeah, and I get that genuine enthusiasm that you bring to the table, Bob. I think that's one of the things I've always admired about you, and I've always enjoyed coming down to the Cove and being a part of your event. It's done so many great things. Bob, one of the stats I read that really blew me away is 55% of Team USA Paralympians have received a grant from CAF. Wow,
This
that's
year,
impressive.
when we were in Paris, there was 225 members of Team USA, and 127 of those. There was 225 members of Team USA. 127 of those had received grants from CAF. And it's like
Amazing.
I love that. And actually, this is a couple Olympics ago. Might have been 16. This woman Deborah Jackson, her son Desmond, had received a running leg from us, and she came up to me in Rio at the Paralympics. She goes, you guys don't realize how important your work is. My son Desmond received a running prosthetic from you guys 2 years ago, and tonight he's running in the finals of the 200. It's like,
Wow.
yeah, I mean, that's the type of stuff that you really love. And just being a team at the USA House and having families come up and all different sports, and their kids have, they're comfortable in their own skin. They're loving life, and they see that there's future. You can be used to be, and Bob, you know this, if you were an Olympian, you got $35K for a gold medal. If you were a Paralympian, you got a bagel and a t-shirt, right? You got nothing. Now it's equal. You got equal prize money.
Maybe a plane flight home.
Maybe if you got the gold. But I mean, now everything is equal. And starting in 2028, there's like $100,000 carrot out there if you make the U.S. team, and then another $100K is a retirement fund. So they're recognized, and that's for Olympians and Paralympians, which I love. It's really a great, and one of the things we've been pushing a lot for athletes like Rudy, I think, has another games in him. We just have to figure out what sport it's going to be. And could it be a winter sport, right? A lot of our guys, you got the engine for a summer sport. There's no reason you can't be doing para-Nordic skiing, para-biathlon, trying something different, because being on the team year round means good dollars and making a living as a professional athlete, basically.
Hey, Bob, we've seen so many different sports. I mean, turn on the TV, there are sports at any 1 minute of every single day. And I'm just kind of curious, do you feel, having been around the adaptive world as long as you have, do you feel like, in a way, it hasn't been tapped into properly? I mean, is there another frontier that's coming up, another level, or have we peaked out?
Oh no, there's so many other levels, because there's so many new sports coming in. So sport climbing became an Olympic sport, and now it's a Paralympic sport for 2028 in LA. That's a new sport with like Rudy's girlfriend Emily Gray, who's lost her leg to cancer when she's 10 years old, 3-time Paralympian in swimming, and she lost her leg all the way up to the hip. Well, she just got back from World Championships in climbing. So that her goal is to go to the Paralympics in 2028. There's a lot of sports out there that are either in the games or will be in the games sometime soon. But there's so many opportunities. The other thing, Bob, that I love, back when Jim McLaren was injured, there really weren't very many sports for quads, right? There was wheelchair rugby. There was quad rugby. Now it's wheelchair. It means if you have 4 limbs that are affected. So Landis, the baseball player behind me, who became the first high school baseball player missing all 4 limbs, missing both hands, both legs, made his high school varsity baseball team. Producer Eric Cochran followed him for 8 years. And that film, Landis Just Watch Me, is on Google Play, Amazon Prime, Apple TV, and it's beautiful. But, so a kid like that is playing baseball. But for someone who's a quadriplegic, there is wheelchair rugby, there is power soccer, and you've got Tetra, which is unbelievable. You've probably seen that, the Tetra chair, where guys who are either using a joystick or a puffer to ski. We're quadriplegics. It's the coolest thing ever.
We'd like to take a minute to thank our sponsor, Sports and Spokes magazine. For nearly 50 years, they've produced stories on iconic athletes performing at the top of their game, given generational coverage of sports dating back to the 1970s, and they've shown the way with exciting and timeless magazine cover shots. To stay on top of all the latest news from the world of high-performance adaptive sports, go to sportsandspokes.com. Sports and Spokes, the magazine for wheelchair sports and recreation. Hey, Bob, let's have a little fun. So you've been around a while. You've seen a lot of stuff, man. Epic battles. Carlos Molina, Dave Bailey out there, in Hawaii, duking it out side by side. Jim Kanab busting it down the road, flashing back, looking at Craig Blanchett coming into the finish. You've seen a lot of stuff. Reflect back. Give me a really great moment that you recall.
Well, my favorite really is when you talk about Carlos Molina and David Bailey. Here you've got take a step back. In 94, we started talking about getting wheelchairs and hand cycles into the Ironman, right?
Right.
And the original thought was from the Ironman is, hey, the sport is swim, bike, run. If you change it and allow people to use a hand cycle rather than a bike and a racing chair rather than running, what happens if someone says, hey, I don't swim, I want to use a windsurfer? Are you opening up Pandora's box? And I'm like, no, you're not. You just have to be very specific with your rules. So it's swim, long seat, right? Because if you're on a kneeler, folks who are paralyzed can't use a kneeler, right? You'd fall. Carlos and David would fall over on a kneeler.
Sure.
So, but someone like an Oz Sanchez who has abs, he can use a long seat. So it became swim, long seat, hand cycle, and racing chair. And you can't mix and match. And so, anyways, a guy named Dr. John Franks, he tried to make the cutoff time in 94.
I remember.
Remember that? Mm-hmm. Then in 95 and 96, John McLean from Australia came over. Missed the bike cutoff time both times. And people started saying, well, maybe we need to change the cutoff times. And I was very insistent that equal playing field, right? You shouldn't, hand cycle, wheelchair athlete, they don't want anything. They don't want something given to them. They want to make the cutoff times. So then John McLean, and actually when he finished in 96, when he came over and he didn't make the bike cutoff time, the race director asked him to go do the marathon just so they could be sure someone could finish all three under the 17-hour cutoff time, which he obviously did without a problem. They put a medal around his neck, and John's brother said, you can't keep that. You didn't make the cutoff times. So he had to take the medal off. Then he comes over next year, goes 12:21, made all the cutoff times. And then the following year, here comes the Navy SEAL who was shot in the back in Panama. And here's the motocross world champion, David Bailey, Carlos Maleta, going head to head for the first time in 98. And Carlos had beaten by David in that Tour of Alaska, that event that you guys do up there. So David felt like, and then David beat him again in Lubbock, which was a qualifier for Kona. So he's thinking, I'm going home and refine. And Carlos went home and went to work. And when he got to Kona, he crunched David that first year. And like you said, David was compromised a little bit, but Carlos went 10:55, which would have won the Ironman overall in 78 and 79. The following year, Carlos kicks his butt again. The following year, David is a man on a mission. And
2000.
2000. I see them at the Carbo party 2 nights before the race. And I said to Carlos, I don't know why, but I think it's going to be a race this year. And he goes, Bob, I know you want to believe that, but it's going to be over early. So they have this, after out of the water, you climb up Polani. And David said Carlos went by him like he was on a moped. And he didn't see him until he caught him. He ended up catching him with about 6 miles left to go in the bike. And he caught him, and he's with Carlos, and then David flats, and Carlos gets away. And so meanwhile, they start the marathon, and a couple days before the marathon, David Bailey was out on the race course in his racing chair. And he got to the top of what we call the Natural Energy Lab. Natural Energy Lab, you go into at mile 16 and you come out at 20 with 10K to go, right? But it's a little bit of a downhill and then a little bit of an uphill grunt on the way back. And David had already been out there for a couple hours, and he's thinking to himself, do I really need to go? It's 90 degrees right now. Do I really need to add this 4 miles to my freaking workout right now? And he decided, you know what? It could come down to this. I need to know every rock, every crack in the road. So anyways, on race day, David is behind by 5 minutes when they come through town. There's David's mom. It's her birthday. And David says, my mom and my wife are giving me the golf clap. The good try, honey. Carlos is kicking your ass again. And it's over, right? He gets to the Natural Energy Lab, goes down in the Energy Lab, and coming out, David's in front of Carlos. And I'm going, I can't believe that. And we had a photo on the wall at CAF Forever of David, full push, right? And tears are flowing. He's in front of Carlos. And we get to the finish. He beats Carlos. And when David comes through, I said, you want to get a massage? He goes, no, I need to wait for Carlos. Carlos comes in. They touch the grimy gloves. They hug. And I see David say something to Carlos. And I'm like, what did he say to you? He said, thank you. I said, what? He said, that's what I said. He said, thank you for pushing me to a level I never would have reached on my own. And me, That was the epitome of competition. That was the epitome of two great athletes who wanted to kick the other guy's ass, and the chairs disappeared. Throughout
Yeah.
that race, people on bikes, they knew of that rivalry. They knew
Mhm.
Carlos. They were going, go Carlos, go David. They knew these guys, and it changed our sport because like Dave Scott and Mark Allen, you had a rivalry. You had two guys who wanted to kick the other guy's butt, and finally David got it. And to a certain degree, I think Carlos was okay with that. He came back when he was 50 years old to win his 5th and final Ironman World Championship title.
Epic story, Bob. I think at some point in time we're going to have to get Dave and Carlos and all of us together,
I love
and
it.
we got to do this thing again because that was amazing. Hey, Bob,
Yeah.
CAF has done so many great things. You have done so many great things. I mean, you really have, and it's been an honor, a privilege. All these decades of time we've spent together, from young men to here we are now. We're still doing good stuff, and I look forward to meeting you down there at the event again this year, and keep it going, man. Thank you so much for everything you've done.
Well, Bobby, just that era of racing when it was you and Jimmy and Blanchette and Kennedy, that was a great, great era of wheelchair racing because
It was.
you guys, again, made the chair disappear. It was all about the athletic. Remember the wheelchair crit we did in downtown La Jolla between the men's
Undoubtedly.
race and the men's race and the women's race? My favorite part of that was, one, I brought in big trucks with lifts on them, and we brought in wheelchair patients from Sharp and Scripps Hospital and set
Right.
that up in the corner, right? And so
up on that little stage.
yes,
Yeah,
they
right
were.
on the
They're
corner.
right there. So they
Yeah.
got a sense. And I remember interviewing Dave Kernow, who was one of our quadriplegic guys, and saying, what do you gain from this? He goes, you know what I gain? I don't know if I'll ever get there, but it's great to know that it's there. I'm not going to get to that level those guys are at, but it's wonderful to know it's there. And then the other thing was, after each race, after the crit, you guys would come up and hang out with these patients who, some of them were brand new. They didn't know what the future held. And
Right.
then the cyclists came up, right? And they're comparing, oh, I've got titanium bottom bracket. What do you got? People, because gear is gear. If it's a
Yes.
hand cycle or a racing chair, or if it's a bicycle, gearheads are gearheads. And you guys can compare notes. So I always loved seeing the athletes together, because if Bob Molinati is one of the best hand cycle athletes or one of the best racing chair guys in the world, and there's a running guy and there's a triathlon guy, there's a fraternity and sorority of suffering that you guys all relate to. They know the hours you put in to win the LA Marathon or to win whatever race you're doing, because they're the same way, right? They know how hard they have to work to be the best. Nobody gets to be a best in an endurance event without suffering. That's what I always enjoyed. And Bobby, over the years, you were always very gracious with your time, coming up my first competitor radio and Babbittville radio and all the different stuff we've done.
Hey, Bob, thank you so much. There's really nothing more to say, man. Great stuff. Can't wait to see you.
Thank you, buddy. Take care.
Bye-bye.